There are certain things you see on 4chan that you learn not to believe. Fake confessions. Staged photographs. People claiming they have killed someone because watching strangers argue about whether it happened is the entire joke. So, when photographs of a dead woman appeared on 4chan's B board on November 4, 2014, alongside someone claiming responsibility for her death, disbelief was almost the natural response. Some users assumed the photographs were fake or recycled. And honestly, that would have been my first theory too. Maybe this was staged gore. Maybe the poster had found real crime scene photographs somewhere else and invented a confession around them. On B-Poppy, where real and fabricated shock content constantly collided, that explanation required almost nothing supernatural or conspiratorial. Then the anonymous poster gave everyone something much harder to dismiss. He told them to check the news in Port Orchard, Washington. He said the woman's son would soon return home, discover her, and the police would be called. Then he essentially told everyone to wait. Contemporary reporting shows that people in the thread were still openly skeptical. For a moment, that creates a second possibility. Maybe the person posting was not the killer at all. Maybe he was an insider, someone who knew a murder had already occurred, someone with access to photographs before the media did. A witness, an employee, perhaps simply someone who had obtained material leaked from the scene. That explanation would preserve one comforting distance. The person speaking to 4chan might not actually be the person who killed her. Then reality started catching up with the thread. Amber Copeland was found dead inside her Port Orchard home. Police were alerted at approximately 3:30 that afternoon. The location matched. Investigators subsequently said the photographs posted online matched the woman, the visible injuries, and the interior of the residence. Suddenly, the fake image theory was dying, but the insider theory could still survive, until investigators reconstructed what David Kalak had done. The photographs were recovered from Kalak's own phone. Investigators traced his movements after leaving Port Orchard, and evidence later established that he stopped at a Walmart in Chehalis, bought a realistic-looking BB pistol, then remained in the parking lot. That was where Kalak posted the photographs to 4chan. By the time his case reached court, the anonymous poster was no longer anonymous. David Kalak had killed Amber Copeland. David Kalak had photographed her. David Kalak had uploaded those photographs himself. He was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 82 years in prison. That solves the obvious mystery. It creates a much darker one. Why 4chan? You could say attention. You could say boasting. But those explanations feel incomplete when you look at the timing. Kalak did not anonymously confess months later after developing some need to reveal what he had done. He posted before Amber had even been publicly discovered. And when people doubted him, he did not disappear. He effectively challenged them to wait until reality proved him right. That makes me wonder whether the audience itself was part of what he wanted, not accomplices. Witnesses. There is no evidence that 4chan users helped him commit the murder, and I found nothing supporting an accomplice theory. But psychologically, the posting can be read as something closer to a performance. An anonymous man presenting something horrifying to an audience that initially refuses to believe him, then waiting for the outside world to authenticate it. That interpretation cannot be proven, but his own language makes it difficult to ignore completely. He said he wanted to share the photographs before police found him. Then there is another disturbing possibility. Maybe B-Flash was useful precisely because people would not believe him. Imagine posting evidence of an actual murder somewhere so saturated with trolling, gore, and fabricated confessions that the first defense mechanism of the audience is laughter. For a brief period, reality could hide inside the exact environment where everything looked fake. I cannot establish that Kalak deliberately chose 4chan because skepticism would provide camouflage. Nothing in the evidence I found proves that motive, but functionally, that is what happened. Users saw evidence of a real homicide and initially processed it using the rules of internet trolling. One Ars forum user later summarized the problem almost perfectly. A sufficiently bizarre murder confession could become indistinguishable from an ordinary B thread, and the horror does not end there. Kalak told users he had purchased the realistic BB gun because he intended to provoke police into shooting him. That creates yet another model. Maybe the 4chan thread was supposed to be his final broadcast. Murder. Photographs, anonymous confession, news, confirmation, then suicide by cop. Almost a complete narrative, uploaded before the final scene. Except the final scene never happened. Police encountered Kalak in Oregon. He fled during a pursuit. Later, he abandoned the vehicle. Then, instead of forcing police to kill him, he surrendered. So even the ending he announced to the internet turned out to be unreliable. And that is where the rabbit hole changes again. Because Kalak could surrender, the photographs could not. 4chan administrators deleted threads containing them, but copies continued appearing elsewhere. Contemporary reporting described new threads reappearing even as older ones were removed. Some users turned the images into memes, while others reacted with disgust. Once it became clear they were looking at a real murder victim, that creates the final dark theory, and unlike the earlier ones, it does not require guessing who the killer was. Was digital permanence part of what Kalak wanted? Did he understand that once he uploaded those photographs, nobody, not 4chan, not the police, not Amber's family, could ever guarantee that every copy would disappear? I cannot prove that was his intention, but the harm itself is real. Amber's family later described the continuing trauma caused by those images. Her children eventually encountered photographs of their mother online, and the internet dissemination became part of the reasoning surrounding Kalak's exceptional sentence. The original mystery therefore has an unusually complete answer. It was not a hoax. It was not staged gore. The poster was not an anonymous insider leaking somebody else's crime. There is no evidence of a hidden accomplice. David Kalak was the killer. But solving that mystery leaves behind something more unsettling. For a short period on November 4, 2014, a real murder existed online in a strange intermediate state. The killer knew it was real. The victim's family did not yet know what had happened. The police had not yet arrived. And hundreds of strangers were staring directly at evidence of it, while debating whether they were looking at fiction. Then the news arrived. The fake theory collapsed. The anonymous identity collapsed. The suicide by cop ending collapsed. Eventually, even the question of guilt collapsed. Only one thing refused to close. The images kept spreading. Kalak was eventually placed behind bars. The crime scene was eventually released back to the world. But part of what happened inside that room had already been copied outside it. And once that happened, there was no longer any single place from which it could be removed. The first people who saw the image did not immediately know they were looking at a real murder victim. That may be the most disturbing place to begin. On July 14, 2019, an image of 17-year-old Bianca Devins appeared in an online Discord community. Some of the people who knew her online initially thought it might be fake. Disturbing images were not unusual in those spaces, and shock content was often posted simply to provoke a reaction. Then people began recognizing the name attached to it. Brandon Clark, a 21-year-old man Bianca knew in real life. Users started contacting police. Before officers had completely established what was happening, people scattered across the internet were already looking at evidence of a homicide. At first, there was still an escape route for anyone watching. Maybe Clark was trolling. Maybe the photograph had been manipulated. Maybe Bianca was alive and somebody was using her image to manufacture something horrible around her identity. In fact, some of her friends apparently hoped exactly that. They wanted the picture to be another piece of fake internet gore. Then Clark called 911 himself. He gave police a location near a dead-end road in Utica, New York. Officers eventually found Bianca's body concealed nearby, and Clark seriously injuring himself. The photograph was real. The person posting it was not an anonymous stranger pretending to know what had happened. He was the killer. That should be where the mystery ends. Instead, it is where the internet rabbit hole begins. Bianca and Clark had originally met through Instagram. Their relationship moved offline. Police said they knew each other's families and had spent time together. On the night before Bianca died, they traveled to a concert in New York City with another young man. Investigators later examined Bianca's messages and learned that Clark appeared disturbed by her interaction with him. Prosecutors eventually argued that this was not simply a spontaneous moment of rage. They believed Clark had decided that if Bianca ended their relationship, he was going to kill her. But Clark did something after the murder that changes the entire character of the crime. He documented it. Investigators later found that he had recorded the killing itself. Afterward, he photographed Bianca and began posting material online. CBS reported that one of the first images appeared on Discord. Clark also posted to Instagram. From there, the photographs moved rapidly through Twitter, Facebook, 4chan, and other communities. Discord and 4chan users were among those who contacted police after seeing what had been posted. So calling Brandon Clark a 4chan killer is slightly misleading. 4chan was not the single origin point. What makes the case more disturbing is that there was no single origin point for long. The crime became distributed, and that opens the first darker question. What if the photographs were not merely evidence Clark happened to upload after killing Bianca? What if having an audience was part of what he wanted? There is evidence that Clark addressed people in Bianca's online social circle through his posts. There is also evidence that jealousy toward another man was significant to investigators' reconstruction of events. That makes it tempting to imagine the uploads as a message. Not simply look what I did, but look what I took away from you. That is an interpretation, not an established motive, but it changes how the posts feel. The people receiving them were no longer just random spectators stumbling onto gore. Some were people who knew Bianca. Some knew Clark. Some were precisely the people capable of understanding immediately who they were seeing. In that model, the internet becomes something closer to a room he deliberately filled with witnesses. Then there is an even darker possibility. Maybe Clark understood that the audience would not end with those first witnesses. Maybe virality itself mattered. Again, I cannot prove that. But what happened next gives the theory its horror. Instagram removed Clark's account. Discord removed material. Individual threads vanished. Platforms attempted to suppress copies. The photographs kept moving. Users downloaded them, reposted them, turned them into memes, and inserted them into hashtags associated with Bianca. Trolls began deliberately sending the images directly to her relatives. CBS later described this continued targeting of the family as a form of psychological terrorism because every new message carried the threat that the image could return without warning. This is where the crime seems to mutate. A physical murder has a location, a road, a vehicle, a body. Police can secure those places. Evidence can be removed. Eventually, the tape comes down. But once Clark uploaded Bianca's image, part of the crime scene stopped having a location. Now it existed on phones, screenshots, private folders, anonymous boards, accounts that could disappear and be replaced in minutes. 4chan's role becomes especially disturbing here. It was not where the story necessarily began, but it became one of the environments capable of stripping the image from its original context and turning it into internet material. Something repostable, remixable, and increasingly detached from the fact that the person in the photograph had a family who was still alive and could encounter it. That creates another theory I find harder to dismiss than any mystery about hidden accomplices. Maybe the most important audience was not the people Clark originally posted to. Maybe it was everyone who came afterward. Not because they were part of his plan, but because they unknowingly completed something he had started. Every repost extended the act. Every meme removed another layer, separating homicide evidence from entertainment. Every person who deliberately sent the photograph to Bianca's mother transformed a murder committed by one person into a new act of cruelty performed by somebody who had never even met the victim. CBS reported that Bianca's mother received the images repeatedly. Years later, the family was still fighting their circulation. And as recently as 2026, nearly 7 years after Bianca's death, her mother, Kim Devins, was still describing the struggle to remove copies appearing across social media platforms. Legally, there is very little mystery left. Clark pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. On March 16, 2021, he was sentenced to 25 years to life. He later challenged his guilty plea and sentence. But on June 6, 2025, New York's appellate division unanimously affirmed the judgment. The killer is known. The motive was investigated. The criminal case reached a conclusion, but the internet part of the case never received anything resembling a clean ending. And that is what separates Bianca Devins from an ordinary solved murder. For a brief period on July 14, people online were staring at a photograph and asking whether a girl they knew was actually dead. Then police confirmed that she was. The uncertainty disappeared. The photograph did not. Clark could be arrested. His Instagram account could be deleted. A Discord message could be removed. A 4chan thread could vanish. The original crime scene could eventually be cleared. But by then, thousands of strangers potentially possessed pieces of it. And almost 7 years later, Bianca's family was still living with the possibility that somebody, somewhere, could decide to put those pieces back in front of them again.